So let's start at the beginning. What do y'all think about as Crip Time? How does it show up in your life and work? And you might also, if you want, say a little something about the word Crip.
Okay. That was not, I'm gonna skip the third one because I only prepared the first two. So the question is, what is Crip Time, right? And I want to start by saying probably a lot of people in this room already know it, but Crip is reclaimed slang that a lot of radical disabled people use, like short for cripple, the same way a lot of queer folks have reclaimed queer. And I wanted to start by citing, there's this essay that's cited a lot by disabled scholar Ellen Samuels, which is called 6 Ways of Looking at Crip Time. It's really beautiful. And I wanted to start from reading from the beginning of that piece where she says, when disabled folks talk about Crip Time, sometimes we just mean that we're late all the time, maybe because we need more sleep than non-disabled people, maybe because the accessible gate in the train station was locked. But other times when we talk about Crip Time, we mean something more beautiful and forgiving. We mean, as my friend Margaret Price explains, we live our life with a, quote, flexible approach to normative timeframes like work schedules, deadlines, or even just waking and sleeping. My friend Alison Kafer says that rather, quote, rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, Crip Time bends the clock to meet disabled bodies and minds. I've embraced this beautiful notion for many years, living within the embrace of a Crip Time that lets me define my own normal. Okay, so it's beautiful, it's a lot of words. I loved it when I read it, but I didn't start practicing Crip Time in an academic setting. I first heard it used really colloquially by other disabled, punk, weird, queer, brown activist people, and as a pet term or a term of love. I probably heard the word Crip when I shoplifted Eli Clare's book, Exile and Pride, in 1999 because I didn't have any money, and I was like, that's so beautiful. And I didn't have anyone to call me Crip or who I could call Crip for years, but that book was a real word and a friend. And I have this very clear memory of rolling down Pike Street in Seattle, like me with my cane, my friend who's a double amputee, and our friend who's a power chair user, and seeing another disabled person who was spare changing, who just looked at us and said, Crip power. And I was like, that's so beautiful. And that's a moment of Crip Time, right? That's a moment of seizing the sidewalk and this moment of us all moving slowly and having people get mad at us because we were taking up too much, space on the sidewalk or whatever. And I want to say that I was doing Crip Time way before I ever ran into Ellen's work. I was doing Crip Time when I was a very sick 21-year-old who was sleeping 20 hours a day. I was doing Crip Time when I was a very depressed young survivor teenager and young adult who could barely get out of bed. And I ran into Crip Time when I first started making other disabled friends who, when I would be very stammeringly apologetic and shame spiraling because I was late, right? Because I was tired, or my dyscalculia had made me mix up times, or I'd gotten so lost trying to find the building. Or I really wanted to go to the sex party, but it started at 11 p.m., so I couldn't do it, right? Crip Time was there when my friend said, what's really sexy is when you don't push yourself past your body's limits into an inaccessible space and you're really sick the next day. Or when my friend was so forgiving for us being late and being like, actually, we're on time. We're on our own time, right? Some people may be familiar with Mia Mingus's term access intimacy, which is that intimacy between disabled people when we know and can understand each other's disabled ways of being. And that's a place that Crip Time shows up for me, right? And it can be about being really slow, and I think it gets talked about a lot that way. And also I want to push back on that and say sometimes it's also both and very fast, because you've got 5 minutes of energy, so you got to make it real fast. Or Access-a-Ride comes right at 9 p.m., so you got to end right on time. It's that disabled temporal knowledge. And Crip Time was there when I was a suicidal teenager, and it's there for me as a 50-year-old surviving disabled bitch, a lot of whose friends have died. And I want to really cite Rashida Phillips' amazing work with Black Quantum Futurism. Please check out her new book, Resisting the Master's Clock, that just came out, where she talks about, among many other things, the idea of temporal autonomy, which is the right to have serenity over the ways in which we interact with time. And she talks specifically about how, as a Black queer person, there's all of the Afrofuturists and Black ways that Black folks and African diasporic folks are always resisting white time. And I'm still really sinking into her work, but it's making me think a lot about how, as disabled people, we are always having the oppressor's clock pushed on us, and we are always pushing back against it. Okay, I'll stop talking. That's what I got. Haley, what do you think?
Well, I want to back up a little. So I like that you said, right, we're always resisting and fighting the oppressor's clock. And I think it's important to note that we have these dominant forms of time in our society that we don't often acknowledge, like clock time being probably the most prevalent, right? Like clock time organizes our lives. It's, organizes like the market in a neoliberal capitalist society. It organizes our relationships, supposedly. And there's also other forms of dominant time. Like, for example, in my research, which is in nursing homes, there's things like institutional time, which is how institutions think about time in this very strict, unbending way. It's like clock time, but on steroids. Mm-hmm. Or bureaucratic time, which is, right, like how many hours do these caregivers get to work? And how much do we pay them? And how long are their breaks? And they don't really need a 30-minute break, right? They can do it in 15. That's like bureaucratic time. So there's lots of dominant forms of time that are really oppressive to disabled people and those that we're in community with. And so Crip Time is really this point of resistance, like Leah so beautifully said, that gives us a completely different way of orienting to the world. And I really like, Allison, your characterization of Crip Time as soft or softness, because to me, it really highlights how time is actually something like we can fold and bend. It's something malleable that we can shape and shift to our needs rather than the needs of neoliberal capitalism. And the other reason I really like this idea of softness is I personally associate softness with gentleness. And I often, like because of internalized ableism, need reminders to be gentle with myself when I'm not conforming to clock time, which is basically all the time. Right? But like, I'm constantly under pressure, for example, to start class on time and grade students' papers on time, whatever that means, and publish on a certain time schedule, right? And I'm not doing any of those things on the time the Academy would like, but I am doing them on my own time, and that's okay. Like, I can be gentle with myself and approach it in this, again, really flexible, malleable way. And I also want to talk a little bit about this form of Crip Time that I saw specifically in dementia units of nursing homes, which I sometimes call dementia time, or I've also called it demented time. I'm playing around with the words. But this is like essentially an extension of Crip Time, where it's not just about the flexibility of time, it's also about acknowledging that we are all in different like timescapes and realities. And instead of trying to pull people with dementia or other mental disabilities like back into our timescape, our reality, how do we actually meet them in theirs, right? And I saw the care workers in the nursing home do this all the time. And it was always so beautiful for me to witness, because those were the times where I could tell the old one with dementia felt the most cared for. When someone wasn't telling them, you're wrong, it's not breakfast, it's dinner. No, we have to do this right now. It was like the times when the care workers were like, yeah, let's go to breakfast, even though it was like 6 p.m., Yep. Or like, no, you're right. We don't have to do that right now. We can go do something else. And of course, the institution's like, no, like you need to, right, be doing all these things at a certain time. But the care workers were really pushing back against that. And I think if I hadn't been exposed to Crip Time, I don't know that I would have seen it in the same way. So I just want to also thank Allison and Leah, whose work has really influenced my own a lot.
Sylvie started off by saying that this is just the beginning of a conversation. I mean, I think we could spend the whole hour just on this one question.
Yeah.
And before I get to the second question, I just want to note a couple things that y'all said that I really appreciate. Both of you in different ways, I think, are talking about the relationality of Crip Time. And Leah, you said something about being in a time in your life when you had no one to call you Crip. And what does that mean to be in a space where you aren't being called by this thing that you are? And it just made me think about how Crip Time is this thing that we create together, like this relational dimension. And the other thing related to that is that you both also, because you were just talking about being gentle with yourself. And so my mind is going in a bunch of directions, sort of thinking about what's the Crip Time that we form together, and then what's the Crip Time that we need within ourselves or for ourselves. So I'm just really appreciating your comments.
Can I say two things that I forgot? Is that okay? I don't want to dominate the conversation. There was just two things that I was like, oh, it's down in this Google Doc. And when you were talking about dementia time, Haley, like that's so beautiful. My mom lived with late stage dementia for a long time. And that was some of the time that we were the most close because we had a lot of trauma in our relationship when she was more in normative reality. And when she was in between the worlds, like we actually connected in a much different way that was really powerful. And that felt like time travel, right? And there was something about that made me think of two things. Like it made me think about just how in the disabled time that we live in, we can kind of dilate time. We can make it be really fast or really slow again. And some examples of what I'm meaning is I'm thinking about friends of mine who have disabilities, who have the kind of disabilities where they were told from when they were really young, you're not going to live to get old. And like my friend Stacey Park Milburn, who was told that. And, you know, our friend Max Airborne always said of her, there's no keeping up with the whirlwind. And she pushed herself to live and pack so much activism and organizing and love and adventure into the 33 years she lived on this planet. And also something that people didn't always see about her was she was like, yeah, I got that movie pass thing. I watched 8 Marvel Cinematic Universe films in one weekend. Like she was just like, there's like the super Crip almost thing of like, let me do everything because I don't know how much time I have. And then there's the thing of like, actually that slow pace is just as important in the middle of that, right? And I think a lot of us, wherever we are on a disabled spectrum, we have periods where we're like, I'm going to do fucking everything before they kill me. And there's also times, like there's been times in my life where I'm like, I lay on a couch for 6 months and I watched a plant die and that was basically it. And there's something, I don't mean to romanticize it. It's really hard to be sick. It's hard to be disabled in this world because of oppression. And I know that for me at times when I've been super sick and slow, I am in that place of like, this is beautiful and sacred. Like both the fast and the slow are really sacred and they're different than normative time. You know, when I wrote Care Work in the introduction, I wrote a lot about how so much of that book was written on a heating pad when I was sick, a little bit at a time. And again, like, I don't mean that to go out there in some sort of anyone can do it way, but in a way of being like, no, I was bending time. Like I was claiming time to be a creative person and a writer from that sick space. And I think a lot of disabled writers have our own versions of doing that. Okay, I'll really shut up now, but I just wanted to say those two things.
No, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. Did you want to say anything else before?
No.
Okay. I think that's a great segue to the next question. So how does Crip Time reshape our understanding of aging, productivity, and independence? In what ways do disability and aging intersect, and where do they diverge?
You go, if you want.
Okay, so I want to start by saying that disability and aging intersect throughout the life course because we can become disabled or more disabled at any point, right, from birth to death. So that's very important to acknowledge. But I also want to kind of back up a little bit and talk about aging specifically and the ways that we understand aging as it relates to time. So specifically, we generally think of age as chronological, right? Each year I'm a year older, I have a birthday party, have a cake, right? Marking this passing of time. And we really come to define old, right, as anywhere over the age of 65. And this is a holdover, actually, from the Social Security Act of 1935. But what's important to keep in mind about that is that wasn't the government trying to be nice and generous and care for old people, because the average life expectancy then was like 62. Ooh. And actually 52 for Black individuals. So, right, they picked this age of 65 knowing that really only white people with resources would be making it that long, and there wouldn't be that many for them to care for. But despite that history, right, we've really like grabbed onto this idea that like 65 is old. And I really want to challenge that, like, that's the only way to understand aging, as in this like chronological, yearly definition. So Leah and I were talking about this actually right before the panel, but people are not all aging the same. I mentioned, right, that like when Social Security was passed, Black individuals were living 10 years less. Well, they're still living 5 years less on average than white people. Indigenous people are living 10 years less on average than white people. Wealthy people with resources are living 15 years longer than people without resources. And that gap is widening, right? And on top of that, we as disabled people, right, have these medical needs that are often, right, denied, we're gaslit, right? It's just, like Leah said, it's just assumed we're going to die young. So, right, there's nothing that can really be done. And a lot of times, I think this idea that we're going to, quote unquote, die young is really blamed on our bodies and minds, which in and of itself is a form of ableism, because it's not our bodies and minds, but like we need to be thinking about aging as this like intersection between our body and mind, but then also between these structures that are debilitating and killing us, right? Structures related to like white supremacy and patriarchy. I was thinking a lot about Corbett O'Toole, who's a queer disabled elder in our community. And I was doing an interview with her once, and she was talking about how her experience of aging was so different because she had to quit working earlier than her peers due to her disabilities. And then her benefits were always being cut. And her accessible public transportation wasn't actually very accessible. And she couldn't get any affordable housing. And of course, rent just keeps going up and up and up. And so she was talking about how like those were the things that were making aging hard. Right? Is those structural issues. And she actually told me that she really believes there's what she called a poverty to nursing home pipeline. And that has really stayed with me because, right, we think about nursing homes as these places where like very, very old people go. But in fact, like disabled people of all ages, even disabled children, are put in nursing homes all the time. And again, that's not because of our body minds, that's because of ableism and ageism.
I want to say awesome, but it's not awesome. So I think when I was thinking about this question, I was like, yeah, I think the system thinks of both disabled and older people as kind of the dented can store of humanity, like we're the factory seconds. Like there's this real idea that like, oh yeah, when you're 20 and 30 and able-bodied, like that's the ideal, and then you're just kind of a rotting fruit after that. Or if you were born disabled or become disabled, just not like you're 20% off, like you're not as good. And that's because, we all know this, but it's like they want fast, able bodies to make money. And if you're not making money, if you actually need care, like we all do, and maybe you need a lot of care, the system's like, no, you're a drain on the system. We want you to go away. And I want to be really deliberate and say that, the Nazis called disabled people useless eaters, right? And we see that same rhetoric happening right now in this government and in a lot of other places, right? And we also know that there's an alternative view out there that says that every body and mind is sacred and that we all have rights and we all have needs and we all deserve to get them met. And that may sound like some pie in the sky, and I'm really wanting to fast forward to the part where the revolution has happened and we're not there yet. But it's basically the capitalist machine versus the soft bodies with needs to different degrees. So I think about that, and I think about the ways in which there can be and has been coalition work between elders and between disabled people, all kinds of disabled people throughout the age spectrum, right? And I think that that's a work in progress. I know that there's tensions between disabled and elder communities where maybe some elders are like, I'm just getting disabled now, where some disabled folks are like, we've been sick, like, like there's all of that stuff. And I also want to riff off of something that Haley was saying about, just thinking a lot. I've been thinking a lot lately, and it's really personal for me, about who gets the privilege of getting to be old. There was actually some pushback on this panel from somebody who had a good point, where they were just like, hey, I'm about to be 70 and you guys aren't old, like, what are you doing on this panel? And I was like, okay, that's a fair point. And also I was like, I'm going to be 50 in a month, and so many disabled Black and brown friends of mine have died in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I've been called an elder in disabled BIPOC community for a while, and I've just been like, guys, come on. But a lot of people have been like, no, so many of us are murdered. Like, so many of us are murdered, whether it's by the medical system, from being in prison, policing, being pushed by multiple forces to suicide, like all of that. And I really appreciated what you shared about that history of social services and, Social Security actually setting up that figure of 65 as this figure that would exclude people from benefits. Like, I didn't know that, and it doesn't surprise me. And I think a lot about kind of the conditionality of who gets to be an elder, right? Because for so many of us who have shortened lifespans because of oppression, like, we get pushed into elderhood earlier than what is typically thought of as an elder, right? As being over, a given number of age, like 65, 70, what have you. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And I also two thoughts I had was that I think Ellen has this piece, I think, in 6 Ways of Looking at Crip Time, where she's like, as someone who was disabled in her 20s, she's like, I'm like a very young old person. Like, I go to 16 medical appointments a week, and I'm with everyone else who's in the arthritis pool with me is over 65, right? And they're all kind of looking at me like, why are you here? And I'm like, I relate to that. And so for me, sometimes when I think about disabled skills, I think about, in some ways, I might be more prepared for getting older and getting close to my death, because I got sick at 21 and I was in a life-threatening situation, and I have a lot of grief work experience from living in communities where there's been a lot of death and a lot of loss, and where we've had a lot of practice at giving and receiving care with each other, right? It doesn't make it easy, but it means there's more skill and more familiarity, right? And the last thing I want to say is that Crip and aging time are both grief time, right? And I wrote this book, The Future is Disabled, which now I want to revise and I can write book 3 and call it The Present is Disabled, and it kind of sucks, but here we are. But a lot of that book was about as COVID reshapes the world, and as, we clearly are a world that is marked by pandemics, and we're in, what are people calling it? The pandemicocene, I can't pronounce it right, but basically we're in a time of multiple pandemics where disabled realities are everywhere, and so many people are disabled and marked by COVID and long COVID. I think so many of us have had experiences of mass grief, and that is something that's true for a lot of people I know who reach elderhood numerically, and for people who are of all ages who are disabled. And I think that can be seen as, that just sucks, that's heavy. And it's like, yeah, it does suck, it is heavy. And also, if we're living in a time where there's so much death and loss, and we're developing skill around it and common language around it, how can we use that as a strategy? Like, how can we use that to change our movements and our communities to really be there for each other and not be surprised by loss or make it a private thing, if that makes sense?
It totally makes sense. I also really appreciated the history you shared, Haley, about aging and I think this connects with what you were saying too, Leah, in that I know for myself, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how disability is a political category, and we define it in particular ways to determine who does and doesn't get care and what kind of care. But I hadn't really thought about aging functioning the same way, but I think both of you are also getting at how the way we define aging can also be a mode of gatekeeping that determines who does and doesn't get care. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Wait, hold on. I have a statistic I forgot. So my
Yeah,
friend
sure.
actually was like, so in the States, the statistic is actually elderhood starts for queer and trans people at 50, right? Because of oppression and medical gatekeeping and all the things. And there's not a statistic for disabled queer and trans folks or like disabled BIPOC folks, but I would guess it's 40. Just like, I mean, and it's a guess, but just like based on my experience, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of when it starts. And it sucks and it's complicated, but like that's where it is and that's real.
Yeah.
And can I actually also add, you saying that, Leah, reminded me, a lot of the data that we do have about, for example, certain groups whose life expectancy is like shortened, we have it across this like single axis of identity, right? Like Indigenous people, Black people, disabled people, queer people. But like, right, what if you were a Black Indigenous person who was queer and incarcerated? What kind of life expectancy can they expect to have, right? Like if we think about this through the Black feminist framework of intersectionality, we know that like people who are multiply marginalized are even more likely to not get the same care, to not be defined as old when in fact they are elders in the community. And I think that's just really important to acknowledge. And I also realized I forgot to answer the second part of your question. So if I could go back, if I could turn back time. Okay, so something else I really wanted to say is that something I love about thinking about Crip Time and aging is that we have really negative views of aging generally. I think a lot of disabled people, like we really treasure aging because, right, like we don't know how much longer we really have. But like the dominant culture is telling us all the time, right, that like to be old is to be unwanted and unvalued and useless and a burden, to be ugly, right, not attractive, not sexual. And so we have these like really ageist cultural ideologies. And I think Crip Time can really help us by pushing back against those narratives and those stereotypes, because we can think about aging as like a process in a more liberatory way, right? A way where it might slow down and speed up at various points. And we can be critical about like who is it sped up for and what does that say about like the structures that we exist in and those like individuals' life chances. But we can also like slow down and just think like, right, I can take my time. I don't have to rush through life. I don't have to, right, like force myself to keep bending to the capitalist clock. I mean, rushing through Netflix, that does make sense, right? But like, we don't have to like work ourselves to the bone until we're this retirement age, which by the way, they keep raising at 67 right now, but by the time I'm retirement age, it'll probably be like 80. Because remember, they don't actually want to help people. But I think it's just really important to think about Crip Time in that way, about like how can we reorient it from this individual, like medicalized process to something that's actually cultural and structural, and how can we create structures of care that are like maybe through the state, ensuring people can get the care that they need, but beyond that, right, outside of the state, how do we create mutual aid and care collectives, right? And something I love about Leah's writing and also Stacey Milburn Park's writing is about how like QT BIPOC have known how to do those things for centuries, have survived for centuries, right? Doing these kinds of things like care webs and care collectives. And there's so much that all of us, regardless of our identities, can learn from that history.
Did you want to add something else?
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah. Wait, no, I do want to add something. Okay, this also might be the thing where we're like, oh, we already answered like questions 3 and 4, so it works out. I guess in terms of aging, so one thing I was thinking about, like for me as an autistic person, as a neurodivergent person, is that I haven't had a traditional, whatever the fuck that is, like life cycle thing, whatever. And I want to say, like, of course, there's disabled and neurodivergent people who are like, yeah, you know, you go to college and then you get married and you have babies and then it's great and then you die. That's wonderful. I'm not being sarcastic. I want everyone to be happy. But, you know, I haven't been on that kind of neurotypical life escalator, right? Like, I've had multiple long-term significant non-sexual and sexual relationships, right? I've had partnerships. I've had lots of different kinds of like friends, lovers, intimate connections. But I did not choose or get to have like a house, biological kid, partner life, right? Like, and I don't have the 9-to-5 job because every time I tried, I would just get pneumonia and a meltdown at the same time, which is really fun. It's just as fun as it sounds. And I guess I think that like in terms of talk, there's such a popular fear of who's going to take care of me as I age, right? And there's that real emphasis on like, you've got to have a partner, you've got to have kids, because otherwise you're going to just be abandoned because the state does not take care of us, right? And I think whether you have a partnership or a marriage or kids of any kind or not, you're facing that fear, right? Because, you know, nothing's promised. And I guess for me, I'm just thinking about like the really non-utopic and imperfect web of friendship and relationships and communities that I've been able to create, which, you know, I might be really completely fucked at 72 or 65 as well, because all my friends might hate each other or be dead. I don't know. But I guess I'm just thinking about like the power and looking at the really imperfect but beautiful ways that disabled and neurodivergent folks make communities and families outside of, you know, mommy and daddy and the kid and the dog, you know, or maybe you've got that, but you've got a whole lot of other people as well, as a way of surviving, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to really not romanticize it, because I think sometimes people are like, oh my God, you have this perfect community. Fuck no. No, there is so much drama. There is so much breakups. There's so much conflict. And yet there's still something really worthwhile in how survival still happens in there. And I guess I'm just thinking about how like half of the country is not in a marriage or in a partnership, or is single. And that like fear of growing old and dying alone, and what disabled and neurodivergent relational webs that really just throw that traditional model out could share for everybody or offer to everybody. Okay, that's really it.
It's good. It's good. I think I'm going to skip down to this next question, because this is what you both are talking about. How do race, class, gender, and other identities shape access to care, time, and resources as disabled people age? And then what models already exist, which I think is what you're getting at, that can guide us toward a more equitable future? Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, do you?
Okay,
cool. Yeah.
So first I want to say that we have these paradigms of aging that were initially started by gerontology but have really infiltrated our culture. They're called successful aging or healthy aging. Successful aging is literally defined by not being disabled or not becoming disabled, right? So like we're already aging unsuccessfully according to this paradigm, right? But, right, like this idea that, oh, to age well, we have to be productive, we have to contribute to society, we have to be as youthful as possible, right? And I want to be clear to your question about like race and gender and those other social identities, is that like these paradigms of aging are really not made for multiply marginalized people. Like the ideal image of successful aging is like white, cis, non-disabled, upper middle class people who are like dyeing their hair gray and getting Botox every other week and doing yoga on the beach, right? Like working class, queer and trans people, Black, Indigenous people of color, like that's not the image of quote unquote successful aging. And because of like all the neoliberal discourse in our society, again, like we're held at fault It's our fault we're not aging successfully. Like, it's our fault we're not remaining as youthful as possible, which in my work I've called like compulsory youthfulness. Like, right, we all have to be as youthful as possible for as long as possible, not just in terms of like our abilities, but right, like energy, sexuality, beauty, like attractiveness. But it's like this idea that it's our fault when, again, like, right, I want to repoint us back to the structures that are really leaving a lot of people out of these supposed like useful paradigms of aging. And I remember learning about successful aging in undergrad, and it just kept coming up, and I was so annoyed. And I said to my gerontology professor, Dr. Jennifer Kinney, like, oh my God, can we stop talking about this? And she was like, I understand your frustration, but also this paradigm is so prevalent, it's so dominant, we have to be talking about it. We have to be critiquing it. And I didn't realize at the time, this was like 2006-ish, how much more those paradigms would really like leak into society, where like even the World Health Organization started talking about like this global healthy aging, when like people don't have access to clean water or clean air or food. Right. Oh no, you go ahead.
I was just like, that. I mean, I feel like I'm just going to repeat myself, because just what I have to say is like, who gets to live to get old? Who gets murdered young? Like, who dies from medical neglect? Who dies from the death of 1,000 cuts, right? Like, that's like how do race, class, gender, other identities shape access to care, time, and resources as disabled people age? I think the simple thing is like, the more privilege you have, the more you can get. You know, like, obviously, if you're wealthy, you can pay for somebody who's a working class woman of color to take care of you in your home that you own. And I also want to say that, you know, privilege will give you a lot and will also take some things away. I think that there's a lot of really vibrant ways that as Black, brown, queer, trans, working class folks, we show up for each other, and that sometimes when people are more rich, white, whatever, there's just this, you know, they don't have relationships like that. So they have to hire someone to wipe their ass, right? Who they treat badly most of the time. And I think that, you know, I'm not romanticizing it. I mean, those of us who have less of the goodies of privilege, like we got less time, you know, we got less money, we have less of those things. And we also, it's like that thing where poor people always tip better than rich people, right? Like, in the communities I'm a part of, generally speaking, I think we show up for each other more, even if we have less time and money, right? And we know, I think sometimes, that you can't fix something, but you can be there to witness something, and that's a really big deal, right? So there's that, but I mean, I'm just gonna soapbox and be like, we basically need an end to capitalism and a decolonization of time like yesterday, because I mean, the future does scare me. Like, you know, yes, community is great. Like, yes, care is great. I wrote a book called Fucking Care Work that's all about care webs. It's great. And also, like, we need vaccines and surgeries and medical equipment and things that cost money. And I will say, as somebody who has given and received a lot of care in my life from other people who are just showing up as we can, it's wonderful. And there's also times where I'm like, I want to be able to pay a personal care attendant $75 an hour because it's highly skilled labor. And I want that person to have benefits, vacation time, sick time. I want them to be able to have their adaptive equipment there, because so many care workers are either disabled themselves or they become disabled through the work, right? I want care to be seen as skilled labor. And I think right now we're in this terrible conundrum where, you know, personal care attendants in the state, you know, mostly are paid a sub-minimum wage, right? You know, because who gives a shit? And then you have, you know, all of us doing mutual aid to fill in the cracks, but we are also sick and tired. And sometimes, you know, I have been on care teams for friends where I'm like, yeah, I'm disabled, I can't lift. You know, I don't have the physical ability to help you get on the toilet, right? Like, I want somebody who has those skills to care for you with dignity, to be honored, and to have safe working conditions. Like, and I want there to be, and I think that that's the thing is, I want some kind of anarcho-communistic system where we all get to have care on a community level from our friends and neighbors, but where it's also respected as something where people who are doing it as a profession are paid well, right? And we're living in the gaps in between where there's not really a great solution and we're surviving the best we can. Yeah, that's what I got. And I don't know. I mean, we are all really sick and tired more and more, and we are pulling off miracles out of it. And I also have a lot of questions about how as community, I mean, I was joking the other day, I did not expect to have to become part of the replacement of the public health system, but here we fucking are. And sorry, I curse a lot. You'd probably figure that out by now. But I don't know. I mean, so I work with a mask block in Philly, and there was a plane crash that happened in Northeast Philly a month ago. And so a lot of us ran up there to give out masks because planes are really toxic and a lot of buildings burnt down. And then like 2 weeks later, we were in a meeting and someone was like, wait, was there another plane crash? And we were like, fuck. And then we were like, there are 5 million people in the city of Philadelphia. We are a collective of 8 people. We have a lot going on. We are not enough. Like we need something bigger than our individual solutions. And that's not to say that our individual solutions that come out of Black, brown, working class, queer, trans communities are shitty. It's just like, we need more. I don't know. That's what I got.
Yeah, we need more. We need more. Speaking of more, we're starting to get questions from the audience, and I'm wondering how y'all feel about transitioning to that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, you can use the information that's on the screen to submit questions. I believe it's accessible to folks who are virtual as well. So we're getting questions from folks who are in the space and then also virtual space. I don't actually have that information.
Visit slido.com, SLIDO.com, and enter code #time. TIM.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're going to read them out loud?
I'm going to
Okay,
read them out
cool.
loud, yes. What do you dream of for your elder years, whatever that means to you?
Huh.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I want you to go first. I could go first if you really want me to.
Sadly, I think I reflect more on like what I don't want to happen than what I do. This question is really making me realize that, and I think that's because like I have spent so much time. I've been like in dementia units of nursing homes since I was like 16 years old. And I'm 39 now, right? So like decades, and they're horrible places. Like the care workers, a lot of them really do care, and like Leah said, like they are so underpaid, they're so exploited. You know, they're predominantly like immigrants and women of color. But like the institutional aspect of them is so violent. And we know that like people want to age in place, right? We want to stay in our communities with our friends and our families and the places that matter to us. And yet so many of us are taken from those families and communities, right? Because there's just no other option for care. And I want to really echo what Leah said about like, right, like while I do dream of like having access to mutual aid and care collectives, like I also want so much more for us. Mm-hmm. And I really want us to be able to like live in the spaces that we want. Here, I'm thinking a lot right now about like Judith Butler talks about like more livable lives. And what she means by that is like, so many of us are just like surviving. Right? Mm-hmm. And what really makes our lives livable? Like we really have to kind of reflect on that. And she talks about how, right, that again, if we change these structures, like how can we move from surviving to thriving? And I think that is what I want for my later years is I want to feel like I can thrive, like I'm not just barely making it or just spending all of my time trying to avoid like forced institutionalization. Like I want to feel like I can really be with my family and in community. And I really like this question because it's really making me think in a different way than I often do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I had written down for another question that, there's a need for care with rights, skilled care, affordable care, and that often gets posited as we build the nice united movement and then we're going to have the nice united public housing with like in-home care, and I want that. And yeah, I do dream of that for my years. I don't want to be an institution. I want to be loved. I want to be with my loved ones. I want to have autonomy. I want to be able to control my life, And so I have kind of the utopic vision of it, but I also have what feels a lot more possible and closer to home, which is like, it just makes me think about, the fucked up apartment, row home, wherever we end up, where we make these deeply imperfect but important ways of living, whether we're like midlife the way I am or whether we're older, right? Mm-hmm. Like I often don't know if I believe that like, yep, we're gonna have the United Revolution anymore, but I do believe that any place that we carve out that's a liberated zone where we stay alive is really important, right? Like, I don't know if Bernie Sanders is gonna come in and save the day for everybody. He's been trying, whatever. Also Bernie Sanders is not the end all and be all of anything. So I guess for me, if I am able to, I can see myself being in kind of a fucked up apartment with all of my stuff that's kind of messy, with my cat, with my weirdo friends and family and intergenerational community that's probably in a fight. And if that's how I'm living out my elder years and I get to move towards my death, I will be pretty happy with that. I basically want anything that's not a prison. Mm. Yeah? Mm.
Yeah. Y'all are submitting great questions. So there are a couple of questions about that are asking us to talk more about coalitions around aging and disability. So I'm going to combine a couple of them, and you can pick up whatever resonates for you. So one of them says, I had the immense privilege of working with Diane Coleman at Not Dead Yet, almost right up until her death last year. Mm-hmm. We often talked about how irrelevant she felt as she got older. Mm. So how can younger Crips in the disability justice world better honor and collaborate with elder Crips? And then I'm going to add this one to that as well. Thanks to ableism and ageism, it is really hard to get the aging world and the Crip world to unite to fight for a world that values all bodies and minds. How do we combat that and join forces?
Can I take the first one? I don't know how to do the second one.
Yeah.
That first question is like, how do we basically create an intergenerational movement, right? Where younger disabled people and older or midlife disabled people can work together. Yeah, I'm going to do the best I can because my brain is a little bit pudding right now. But I will say, like, I think that with disability justice, we're such a relatively young movement. And when we started out, it was like there was 20 of us. And now there's 1 million of us who have learned about disability justice from our lives and also from Instagram, And we're all so isolated and yet connected by social media and online spaces, which is both great and terrible. But I guess one thing I've witnessed a lot is that when disability justice was smaller, there was just that feeling when movements are smaller of like, we're so precious and we can't throw anyone away and we're gonna hang out with each other because there are 20 of us. And there's that thing that happens where it's like, it's like you're a victim of your own success when a movement gets bigger, where people are like, who's that person who founded this thing? Who, is older and who can't get out as much or maybe isn't getting out at all. So I guess that's one thing to think about from the beginning, is to really reach out to your elders and don't assume that they're okay. Don't assume that because somebody started a group or has their name on something that they have the community that maybe they want. Really reach out, give them their flowers while they're here, but also build relationship. Because it's a really weird thing to be a leader in disability, right? Because like you might be known within disabled world, but you're completely irrelevant to most other people. They're like, that's just some weird cripple on the street. Like who cares, right? And it's not like you get rich off of this. Like you do not get rich off of being a disabled activist. You really don't. So I think there's a lot of intentional relationship building and not pedestalizing people and also not demonizing them. And all of the things that get really complicated about maybe you were there at the beginning of a movement and the movement's evolved, and maybe some people were like, I don't agree with that thing politically anymore. So I think a lot of it also comes down to creating spaces where we can disagree. I'm not saying co-signing really bad things, but we can have political disagreements, but not be enemies to each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that every movement I've been a part of has really struggled with that, because we're like, yay, family. Okay, great, it's a family fight. It's like, you've got to agree with everything. And I think creating spaces where we can actually, whether it's as formal as we're in a group and once a month we're like, okay, it's open political disagreement time. Like, let's argue. But let's still be friends, or whether just knowing how to, maybe not knowing, but practicing being in relationships where you don't agree on every single thing. I think that's really important, because I've seen a lot of elders be like, shit, I don't have the correct line of the week, or I don't know how this technology works, so I'm irrelevant. So I actually think that social media torpedoing in the era of the techno bros is both horrible, because disabled people really depend on social media to connect, and also might be good because we might be forced to, get on the phone, like hang out in the park, like, have more different kinds of ways of connecting, which can span generationality. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. And I mean, I have a whole lot of other soapbox stuff around diversity of tactics and being like Margaret Killjoy, who's a really amazing trans anarchist blogger, had that piece that she put out right after Trump ascended, where she said, 3 times, she said, de-escalate all conflict with people who aren't the enemy. And that's easier said than done, but that's something that I've been really holding on to, where I'm just like, yeah, if I'm gonna end up in the camp with everybody, I don't wanna be fighting people over bullshit. Like, I wanna just be like, what can we make common cause around? Because it really is life or death right now. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm a downer, but I'm also a realist. That's what I got. What do you have?
No, I love that you talked about intergenerational relationships. I've been thinking about those a lot since I was 20. People are often like, why do you go into nursing homes? And why do you spend time with these old people with dementia? And I feel a kinship with them due to my own mental disabilities and due to trauma, not remembering parts of my own life. I don't think that memory, right, is a prerequisite for being understood as a human being. But all that to say is that there is a lot of generational tension right now, and that is intentional by those in power. Because if disabled and elders united, right, to really advocate for some of the things that we're talking about, like actually well-funded care, for example, that would be a huge political block. So the dominant political powers are invested in keeping us divided. And I also think that, I often hear in the disability community that, and there is an element of truth to this, right? But if you grow up non-disabled the vast majority of your life, and then at 70, you become disabled, you have a lot of internalized ableism that you have to work through, right? And you might not even identify as disabled ever in your life. But I don't think that should stop us. Before I was telling the event organizer, Sylvie, that I have a friend who is 70 who became disabled recently. And she was telling me, I'm really struggling. I know that I shouldn't, she's this amazing activist who has done so much work around queer and trans justice and gender justice. And she was I'm so down with all that, but I don't know how to accept this body. Right. And all I can think about is what I lost. And I'm really struggling. And I think it would be easy for me to say well, they don't, she doesn't identify as disabled. She's not one of us. But instead, we've been having a lot of amazing conversations about it. And yeah, she still doesn't identify as disabled, but that's okay. Right? Like, I think you're making a really important point about like, we don't always have to agree, but it's more about like the conversation, the connection that we can find, and not like just counting people out because they're young and like, you know, relatively and disabled, or because they're old and don't embrace disability.
Right.
Like, we shouldn't have to demand that people like identify in certain ways to be part of community.
Yeah.
So I think we really need to like think about that more intentionally when it comes to like bringing together disability and elder communities.
Yeah. And a point I want to make with that is that it's something that I feel like a lot of people have been talking about for a while, about how, you know, there's Black and brown feminists, elders, you know, many of whom have passed on, who were disabled, absolutely. Like Audre Lorde was legally blind and lived with cancer. There's so many examples, who mostly didn't use the word disabled or disability to describe themselves while they were alive, right? And something Aurora Levins Morales, who, you know, lived in Boston, Aurora Levins Morales, incredible Puerto Rican Jewish writer, elder, organizer, you know, we had an essay we wrote together. We talked about Gloria Anzaldúa and how diabetes and bodily difference showed up in her life, and how she never used the term disability. But does that mean that she wasn't living and writing out and organizing out of a disabled body? She absolutely was. And for so many Black and brown women and people, we may or may not have used the word disabled. I mean, my mom was a polio survivor, would not call herself disabled, right? And so for me, sometimes when I'm doing organizing, I'll say, yeah, this is for disabled folks, and I'll have the long list of like, you could be disabled, you could be chronically ill, you could have madness/mental illness, you could be deaf, etc. And sometimes I also put in, or you could have a condition. Because I know so many people who are like, yeah, I've got that thing. But, and he'll have to come over internalized ableism. But also there's this like hesitancy where people are like, I don't want to take space from anyone else, right? Or I've survived by minimizing my disability and pretending it's not there. Like, I don't talk about it like, oh, I'm a capital D disabled person. But they'll be like, yeah, I can't hear that well, or I can't see, or like, yeah, I've got that thing that comes up once a month. And for me, I don't care what you call yourself, but I want to be able to be in movement together and to create a place where it's worth it for you to share about these really vulnerable places in your body and your mind that maybe there's never been a safe place for you to talk about.